Hey everyone, today we're diving deep into one of the biggest ideas in all of science, evolution. We're not just going to talk about what it is, we're going to look at the actual solid evidence that backs it all up.
So, have you ever really thought about it? How do scientists look at a whale, a bat, and you, and say with confidence, yep, you're all related? I mean, it's a huge claim, right? So it's got to have a mountain of proof to stand on.
Okay, but first, let's get one thing straight, because this is super important. When you hear the word theory in science, it doesn't mean what we mean in everyday life, like a hunch or a guess. A scientific theory is the opposite. It's a powerful explanation that's been tested again and again and is supported by tons of evidence. It's basically the gold standard in science. And evolution? Well, that's the grand unifying theory for all of biology. Its strength doesn't just come from one single discovery. It comes from all these different independent lines of evidence that, amazingly, all point to the exact same story. So let's think of ourselves as detectives on a massive case. We're going to follow 5 major clues that scientists have pieced together over the years. We'll look at ancient rocks, the bodies of living things, the secrets in our DNA, and even where life is found on the globe. And then we'll see how it all fits together. Ready? Let's start digging. All right, our first clue takes us way back in time, to a story that's literally written in stone. We're talking about the fossil record, this incredible, sprawling library of life's history. You see, sedimentary rock forms in layers, kind of like pages in a giant book. The deepest layers are the oldest, and the ones near the top are the youngest. And as we read through these rocky pages, a really clear pattern just jumps out at you. The simple forms of life are always in the older, deeper layers. The more complex life, that shows up in the younger layers, closer to the surface. It's a perfect timeline of change. And this order is totally predictable. You will never find a rabbit fossil hanging out in the same ancient layer as the very first fish. It just doesn't happen. Instead, you see this beautiful, consistent sequence. Fish show up first, then later amphibians, then reptiles, and then mammals. This is exactly what the theory of evolution would predict. And every now and then, the fossil record gives us something absolutely amazing, a transitional fossil. These are the fossils that beautifully bridge the gaps between big groups. They aren't some weird half-and-half monster. No, they're complete creatures that just happen to have features from both an older group and a newer one. Think of a dinosaur with feathers, or a fish that's starting to develop limbs. These are the smoking guns of evolution.
Okay, for clue number 2, we don't need to dig in the dirt. We can find it in the bodies of creatures that are alive right now, and even in how we all develop before we're even born. Now, this is a really important idea. On one hand, you have homologous structures. Look at the bones in your arm, a bat's wing, and a whale's flipper. They're all built from the exact same set of bones, but they do totally different jobs: grasping, flying, swimming. Why? The only logical answer is that they all inherited that basic blueprint from a common ancestor. Now, that's totally different from analogous structures, like a bird's wing and a fly's wing. They both do the same job, flight, but they evolved completely independently.
And then you get these really weird things called vestigial structures. I love these. They're basically evolutionary leftovers. Whales, for instance, have these tiny little hip bones floating around in their bodies. They serve absolutely no purpose. They only make sense when you realize they're a remnant from their ancestors who walked on land. It's a clue to their past. And if that's not wild enough for you, look at how different animals develop as embryos. I mean, an early-stage fish, chicken, and human embryo look incredibly similar. We all start with tails, and we all have these things called pharyngeal pouches. In fish, they become gills. In us, they turn into parts of our ear and jaw. It's like we all start with the same basic instruction manual that we inherited from a very, very distant ancestor. All right, time for our third clue. And this one takes us from big body parts down to the tiny, microscopic world of molecules. And honestly, this might be the most direct and powerful evidence for evolution we have. It really all boils down to this incredible idea: the language of life is universal. The code that builds every living thing is the same for every organism on this planet. Just stop and think about what that means for a second. From the smallest bacteria to the biggest blue whale to you and me, the fundamental system for how your DNA is read and turned into proteins is exactly the same. The genetic code is universal. That is just staggering evidence that all life on Earth shares a single common ancestor that used this very same system. And we can actually measure how closely related we are just by comparing our DNA. For example, our DNA is over 98% identical to a chimpanzee's. It's about 85% identical to a mouse's, and even about 60% the same as a chicken's. And you know what? That pattern of similarity lines up perfectly with the family tree we'd already built using fossils and anatomy. It all points in the same direction. For our last big clue, let's zoom all the way out and look at the big picture, where life is found across the planet. The addresses of different species tell a fascinating story about history, movement, and evolution over millions of years. This field is called biogeography. It's all about answering questions like, why are kangaroos only in Australia? And why do animals on remote islands almost always look like a version of animals on the nearest mainland? It's the story of life spreading across a constantly changing planet. And the patterns you find are just amazing. For instance, most of the world's marsupials, kangaroos, koalas, are pretty much all in Australia. Why? Because they evolved there in isolation after the continent broke off and drifted away. And those unique species on islands like the Galapagos, they look like slightly tweaked versions of animals from South America, because that's where their ancestors came from before they adapted to their new island homes. These global patterns just don't make sense without evolution. So we've looked at the clues, from fossils, from anatomy, from our very own DNA, and from the map of the world. Now, it's time to bring it all together and deliver the verdict. See, the real power of this idea isn't in any single clue. It's the fact that all of these completely independent lines of evidence point to the very same conclusion. The fossils show us a history of change. Anatomy shows us the shared family blueprints. DNA gives us a precise measurement of just how related we are. And biogeography shows us how this incredible story played out across the face of the Earth. And that's really the key takeaway here. The reason scientists are so confident about evolution isn't because of one fossil or one gene. It's because of this overwhelming agreement between totally separate fields of science. When genetics, paleontology, and anatomy all tell you the same story, you can be pretty sure you're onto something big. This mountain of evidence paints a truly breathtaking picture of life's 4-billion-year journey. But that story is far from over. Evolution is happening right now, all around us. Which leaves us with a final, fascinating question to think about. What's the next chapter in the story of life going to look like?